And now, we proceed to our next panel on investing in the video and computer games industry. Moderating is Mr. Rizvi Woon, who leads RHTLaw's Intellectual Property and Technology Practice and Consumer Brands Industry Group. Joining Rizvi are key figures in the video and computer games industry. Ms. Felicia Ko, Vice President of Play Ventures, and Ms. Anlu Liu, Content Manager for Kowloon Knights. Over to you, Rizvi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rizvi. I am a partner of the IP and Technology Practice in RHTLaw Asia LLP. This morning, we are very privileged to have with us a panel to discuss the investment opportunities in the video and computer games industry. Now, it can be said that computer gaming is the future of entertainment, given the way things are going nowadays. So the purpose of this panel is actually to look at some relevant criteria, some insights when investing in companies in this industry. So this morning, we are very fortunate to have with us two ladies from the industry who are happy to share their insights and experience in this area. Now, firstly, may I introduce Felicia Ko from Play Ventures. So Felicia is a VP at Play Ventures, leading early-stage global gaming VC fund. Felicia has over 9 years' experience leading marketing and growth at startups and organizations like Singapore's EDB. So I will leave it to Felicia to say a few words about herself. Felicia, over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Felicia. I've been with Play Ventures since 2018. As mentioned, we're an early stage venture capital fund that invests specifically into gaming companies, so most often game developers as well as gaming services. Within game development, we look at developers making games that are free to play, but also now increasingly Web3 gaming as well. We've invested all over the globe, from India to Istanbul. So in a way, we're quite location agnostic. And we invest all the way in companies that are at the pre-seed stage, which in non-VC speak is essentially, just founding teams. There's no product, no revenue yet, all the way up to Series A, where they might have an existing product, some traction and limited revenue. So that's about it.
Thank you, Felicia. Now, next, the other lady on the panel, her name is Anlu Liu. She's from Kowloon Knights. Now, she combines her love for gaming with her prior experience in investment. She joined Kowloon Knights as a business manager and has been there for over 2 years. Her main responsibilities are to find and evaluate games and help studios look for opportunities in Asia. So Anlu, maybe you say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. Right. My name is Anlu, and I've been in Kowloon for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years right now. And Kowloon Knight is a gaming fund supporting exceptional game developers across the world. Our team ourselves, the core team is pretty small. We have about 5 full-time, but we have a bunch of advisors that are super active when it comes to evaluating investment opportunities, helping out portfolio developers, etc. We are located all around the world. I'm personally based in Hong Kong. We have people based in Singapore, Europe, US, etc. So Kowloon itself was established back in 2017, so it's almost 5 years right now. And over these 5 years, we have reviewed thousands of projects, and so far we have signed about 50 titles, which includes stuff like Seafood, Spiritfarer, Opus, etc. And in terms of investment range, we look at project sizes between about $500,000 US to more than $5 million US.
Okay. Thank you, Anlu. Okay. So let's begin now. Ladies, maybe we'll take each one of you by turn. So when you are looking at games developer or an esports team, what are the main qualities you look for when deciding to invest? Maybe I'll ask Felicia.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll focus the question more on game developers since that's the space that we invest in. We don't really invest into esports teams. And coming from it from a little bit of a different perspective from Anlu, as we primarily do equity investments. So I guess the first and most consistent thing that we look at, whether it's a pre-seed stage company or a Series A stage company with a live game, we always look at, for us, the team members, and more importantly, what's the composition of that founding team. I think to give some history into the background of Play Ventures, we were founded by two gaming entrepreneurs, Henrik and Harry, who themselves, started their own games companies, which they sold to Disney and King respectively. So it's coming more from an operational background of having been in games and now investing into games. And as opposed to, for example, more of a generalist venture capital fund that's coming more from a VC background and then looking at various industries. So the things that we look out for are always a founding team with actual experience in game development. Game development, I feel, is one of those spaces that I think because it's such a creative and also relaxing outlet for so many people, it always kind of serves as an aspirational industry for many people who have played games all their lives and now want to make the game that they've always wanted to play. And that's fantastic and that's great. And sometimes you do have amazing hits like Stardew Valley that come out of that kind of founder DNA. But making games is honestly really, really hard. So we look for teams with experience building a game, shipping a game. You'll be surprised that a lot of games end up in sort of a development purgatory where it goes for years and years and never gets shipped. So actually shipping games is an art form. And also teams who have experience running games that scale and have traction and have an active and big user base, because that is also a sign of a team that's able to build a successful title, like run a successful title with live operations. Within that founding team, we're looking for team members specifically with skill sets in game design, understanding, what makes a core gameplay fun, how do you design a meta game to keep people coming back, how do you design monetization? So if you're doing a free-to-play game, eventually you would hope that some of your player base monetizes so that the game developers can generate revenue. So understanding people, having people who understand how to balance an economy, for example, so that you have the sinks, areas where a player would be incentivized or motivated and want to spend money, whether it's for a cosmetic skin for their avatar in the game, or whether it's for certain kind of boosts or anything like that. We're looking for somebody with a CTO or technical lead background. This is primarily because we invest at such an early stage where there is no product, there's just a team. And if you don't have somebody who can build, who can code, essentially development ends up in limbo. Some of the models that sometimes we see is that you might have a game designer or creative director pairing that looks to outsource game development, and that can work, but normally up to only so far. As with any kind of situation where you outsource development to an agency, most likely you're not the one paying top dollar. So if company X comes along and they have a huge budget for this outsourcer, as with anything in any other industry, you just get pushed down the priority list, which then means that your game development is kind of stuck in limbo. It's not as straightforward to say, well, I'll just get the code from them and continue building. It always causes some delay and lag, even if you take over the code base. Your developers have to get up to speed. Maybe there are things that you have to fix within the code base. So yeah, long story short, that's why we look for somebody with a technical lead background. And if I take a step back from just the team, we're looking for a fit with the type of games that they're trying to build. The different type of games require different skills, different understanding. A team who's making, for example, the next kind of Candy Crush, without having experience building that game is probably less valuable than a team who has experience working on Candy Crush and now they're making the next Candy Crush, but maybe with a different mechanic. Or a team who has mostly single player game development experience trying to make a multiplayer game, that's going to cause us some questions as well as to whether they understand matchmaking, dynamics of multiplayer gameplay, so on and so forth. So I guess broadly, those are the two categories that we look for things in.
Wow, sounds sounds like you really need to look for people with the relevant experience, at least, and who know what they're doing. See, so Anlu, so over to you. Can I just check with you? Are your criteria the same, or is there any difference?
Right, I think it's actually very interesting to have me and Cecilia both on the call, because even though we are both investors in the industry, the angle that we approach it is very, very different, right? Maybe I can give a little bit of how the industry works as a background first, and then you will know why the criteria I look at is slightly different. So basically, for a game developer in the industry, if they're looking for funding, I think Cecilia mentioned a little bit, there are two big branches. One is equity funding, where you want to work with Play Ventures, you want to work with other VCs out there. And then on the other hand, you have a lot of project funding partners. So this means that, instead of equity, it means that it's an investment that's long-term, right? Looking at a long-term relationship. But for project funding, it is actually focusing on the collaboration based on just a single game project. And, these partners would give the developer the money they need to make the game for 2 to 3 years in return for revenue share from the project when it's out, right? When it's selling on Steam or on other platforms, these partners would be able to get a percentage of the net revenue from the project when it's selling. And under the project financing partners, of course, there are a lot of partners, there are a lot of people that are doing it differently as well. The most common way is to approach a traditional publishers. So traditional publisher will not only give the developer the investment they need to make for the game, but other than that, on top of that, they will be able to provide a lot of services like marketing, localization, etc. But then, that is the pro of working with a publisher. But the not so good thing is that developers might potentially lose IP rights. They might be, because publishers are very, very hands-on compared to equity partners or compared to other partners out there. Developers might not be able to make a lot of decisions. So it could be stuff like, they can't decide which platform the game launches. They can't decide whether or not the game will be on Nintendo Switch, whether or not it will be on PC, whether or not it will be mobile, to smaller things like, how much should the game sell for, or when exactly should the game launch, right? So that is publisher. And then other than publishers, there are people like us, Kowloon, where we want to offer a completely different model, where it's similar in a way that we get revenue share, but we want to provide a lot of independence. We want to provide a lot of freedom for developers to make decisions. So back to the question in criteria, because for us, we look at a single game collaboration, this means that team itself is not the number one criteria for us. Ultimately, for project funding partners, the most important thing is the game itself, right? There are partners that are focused on a specific genre, like, for example, they invest in action games, they invest in games in a specific art style. But for us, this doesn't really matter. The location of the team doesn't really matter. So when we're evaluating the game, usually the team would send over a short playable demo for us to try out the game. It might be 10 to 15 minutes. It might be a half an hour experience of what they expect the full game to be like. And, when we are trying out the build, we will want to make sure that it's actually something that is fun, right? So we find games that we are passionate about and would enjoy playing. And, in our team, we are all gamers ourselves. That's actually a criteria when we're recruiting. So given that they have something for us to try, it must be something that we find it fun and we see the potential in it. Usually it doesn't look like what it will look like 2 years later when it's out on the platform. But I believe, you can still kind of tell this is really fun. This mechanic is really fun. I can see that people would spend hundreds of hours in it. And that, you might think that, there is a specific genre. Like, for example, I don't play horror games at all, but I'll still be able to tell what a good horror game is, right? Like, for example, one of the games we signed as a horror game, I don't enjoy playing it at all, but the art style is so special. It's so disgusting that I know that people who like horror games would really enjoy it. So I believe that if it's a good game, even though it might not be a genre that you enjoy playing, even though it might look very, very rough about the art at the beginning, you can still be able to tell the unique selling point. So I think that is number one criteria when we're looking at a project. And then the second step, after emphasis on the game itself, is to really access the team's ability to execute. For us, we want to support studios looking into self-publishing. So this means that if developers work with us, they wouldn't work with another publisher, and they will have to have the ambition of building the studio in the long term, where, they want to be able to manage a lot of stuff, right? If you want to work with a publisher, it probably means that you just want to focus on the game itself. You don't want to care about marketing for the game. You don't want to manage your Twitter, etc. But we want to work with developers who actually have the mindset to build the team in the long run, to either hire people in their team to do marketing, to do localization, etc. And that they want to be able to manage all the business and creativity control. So this to us is actually a very special criteria compared to a lot of publishers out there, where we want to look for a team that have the same vision, that will want to become, we hope that, ultimately teams become more independent working with us. So I think to sum this up, maybe I can provide an example on the title that we've signed. One of the titles that we've signed 2 years ago is called Sifu, which is made by a French team. It is a action fighting game where the player plays as a kung fu student trying to take revenge. And of course, it fits our number one criteria, right? Where we tried to build, it was very, very fun. And on top of that, there isn't a lot of these kung fu games in the industry or in the gaming market by then. And we feel like there's actually a lot of demand for it. Not only that, the choreographer of the game is actually a Pang Mai Kung Fu master himself. And he even has a Kung Fu school in Paris. So we can see that the passion in making the game from the team. So we were really, we were really impressed with it. And we thought that, we want to work with them. We want to help them build the vision in making this authentic game. For the second point, because the team, their previous game did very well with the publisher. And then for the second game, they actually want to build a team. They want to become more independent. And therefore, in terms of the vision, it also matches with what we are looking for. So therefore, we signed the game. And of course, there are so many other qualities that we are looking for, but I might not have the time to go through today, such as team track record, quality of their previous work that we would usually look at when we are looking at the project. But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No,
go on. Yeah.
No, I think Anlu gave a really great summary. I think, from the VC point of view, we're looking at betting on the team and not necessarily a specific product. We're betting that the team eventually, if it's not the first game, the second game, or maybe the third game, that they will eventually figure it out. And Anlu's looking more at specific games that she thinks will get a foothold and scale in the market as well. Most of the times when we look at teams, we don't have, obviously we would hope that the first game is a great hit. I think it's a great morale booster for everybody and everyone will be very happy. But, game making is not straightforward and we don't necessarily have the expectation that the first game is going to be a runaway hit. A lot of times the first game is a way for the team to test certain hypotheses. There will be things about the gameplay that works, things that they thought would work and didn't work out. A great way for them to build out their art pipeline and their development processes. And maybe the second game will go better, or the second game is an iteration on the first, where they realize certain things don't work. They iterate or they pivot away from that game concept depending on the situation.
Can I just clarify one point? Because it sounds to me like both of you are talking more about games developers. Okay, but as I mentioned earlier, there's also esports teams. And I understand that probably the criteria or the qualities that you look out for in an esports team would be very much different. Is it a fair assumption?
I can't say too much about esports teams because we don't invest in complete esports teams. And I'll just explain a little bit, I guess, I get a bit of background as to why that's not a focus for Play Ventures. So, gaming, as you mentioned, is a huge part of entertainment, actually. It's a leading form of entertainment right now. To give some context, the games itself is bigger in terms of revenue than movies, books, music. combined. So that's massive, right? And that's a $100-200 billion industry. Whereas esports, although it's growing, it's sizable, it's maybe a couple $1 billion industry. I don't have the exact figure to hand. So for us, it's just a case of scale. Like, it just doesn't really make sense for us to focus on esports. Of course, esports has its place in gaming. And we see all the time esports teams like Blacklist International doing great things. And winning tournaments and everything.
Publicity. It's a question of publicity, right? They know how to publicize all the, shall we say, the excitement, the live streaming and all that kind of thing. Of course, with the good comes with the bad. I understand that there's quite a few scandals also, and that might be, problematic for some people, especially if there are, these are, I guess, red flags. So which actually comes very nicely to the next issue that I want to maybe ask both of you. Red flags or, problematic signs and all that, which may, serve to either give you some caution or deter you, you see. I'm guessing things like intellectual property rights, ownership, or maybe the authorization to use. That's also one of the important things. And I guess maybe lack of it is also, a possible red flag. But what are the usual red flags? What are the usual, warning signs that you have to look out for when you're looking at, the games developers? Maybe I can start with Anlu. You can set us off with this.
Sure, I think there are multiple red flags, other than obvious ones where the game is not good, the team is not good. But the number one red flag would be like production issues. So it probably means that, developers spending too much time on just a specific area of the game, which caused a huge delay in production timeline, right? It could be that the developer is just focusing on making it look pretty, but, doesn't care about the coding or like the systems behind it. Of course, delays are very, very common in the industry. We have titles delaying for a year or two, but if it's delaying for more than 3 years, there might be some issues with the team in terms of how they're organizing with their production timeline. So in order to prevent this, what we usually do is to ask for a production timeline before we sign the game to make sure that they are, at least from the production timeline, it seems like they're allocating the right amount of time for each part of the game development. So that's number one. And then number two is, of course, management issues, how the team is managed. Is there a healthy environment for everyone? Pre-COVID, because we have everyone around the world, we try our best to do site visits. Right now, it's a little bit more difficult. Yeah. But, if they're in the States, we will still try to do site visits. Other than that, we try to do social media checks, stuff like going on Glassdoor as well to check their ratings. And, just a funny story to share. We have been to a studio where we found out that one of the chairs were broken. And it's not a huge red flag, but you can kind of tell, maybe if there are so many broken chairs in the office, they are not really treating their employees that well. So stuff like that, we might be a bit more cautious on. But of course, broken chair, or if the toilet is very dirty, it's just small stuff like that. When it adds up, you can kind of tell that, you might want to avoid, you might want to check it. And then for the third point is definitely unreasonable budget. So we would usually do a rough check of whether or not the investment that they're asking for is realistic. If the wages is extremely high, there might be something sketchy behind it. So we want to avoid that, where we want to send over our questions and concerns on that. And this, of course, would depend on where the location of the studio is, right? The last point is overly ambitious and unrealistic scope, and I think it's very, very common in the industry, where sometimes the developer come in with a pitch, and it has every single element you can see from a hit game, right? They're like, we have multiplayer, we have PvP, we have PvE, we have a super huge map, we can have 500 people together in the server. And then at the same time, we don't only have that. We have single player mode. We have so many characters. People can play it, for 100 times, for example. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I believe this is actually a very common mistake, or a common red flag among the industry, to make sure that the scope of the project is actually, it has to match with the team size. It has to match with the capability of the team, right? We want to avoid stuff where it looks like I don't think they will be able to make it. If you can make it, there's probably a game that has everything already, right? You know what I mean? And not only that, the team would not be able to ship the game, but it's more like the budget. Maybe at first they're pitching you for $2 million investment, but actually turns out to be $5 million at the end. So I think this is actually one of the most important red flags that you might want to try to avoid when you're looking at investments.
Right. Okay. So what about you, Felicia?
I actually think we actually have a lot of overlap in terms of, I think what Andre is talking about is a lot of that game development capability, the ability to ship games, right? And scoping, budgeting, and I think understanding of the space that they want to compete in, understanding of the competitive landscape, those still apply. Although for us, again, because of the space that we invest in, it's equity investments, it's early stage into the team. From that point of view, there are other things that we also probe on. We're looking at, for example, alignment between the founders. Are they moving and rowing towards the same direction? We're looking at, for example, in terms of equity split in the cap table, what does that look like? Sometimes in certain regions, and there's regional differences where you have majority of founders' equity being owned by, let's say the CEO, who might be a founder investor. And of course, if you are an investor as well, we fully expect that you would have more equity than somebody who's just, doing sweat equity. But when it's very imbalanced, like say, before their first investor comes in, 90% of the equity belongs to the CEO, and then you have maybe 5% to the CTO and 5% to somebody else. That's extremely imbalanced. And then that is not maybe the most encouraging founder dynamic, because realistically, the one with 90% is going to be calling all the shots. It's also a case of, in the case of some teams where you have a big differentiator or difference between the founding team's experience. One person has maybe 20 years and one person has 5 years experience. You're trying to assess that dynamic between them. Is this a partnership of equals, or is this really just one person calling the shots again? For us as well, we're investing ultimately in a business. We're looking for CEOs, founders with a real understanding or aptitude for business. We're looking at some of the, if they've received investments before, we're looking at some of the investment decisions perhaps that they've made. We've seen, for example, teams with 20, 30 safe notes, so simple agreement for future equity, which is, a tool from Y Combinator, I believe. In the US particularly, it's very prevalent. But that creates problems because, no safe note was meant to be used that many times. Safe notes were, again, the point was to make it simple once, twice. When you start to have 20, we see founders who really don't even know how much equity they own after all the safe notes convert. We've seen, situations where two teams of lawyers, ourselves and the founding team itself, can't agree on how these safe notes, these 20 to 30, should even convert. So at that point, essentially, the cap table is extremely problematic. And, that creates challenges for the team. Yeah.
Okay. So just because I do practice intellectual property, and I believe that ownership and at least the right to use the relevant underlying IP should be also at least an essential criteria, right? And of course, if there is any uncertainty, if there's any doubt, if there's any, shall we say, some kind of impediment, shall we say, for the enjoyment of the IP, would that also be an issue for you guys?
Right. Maybe I can share a little bit on this, because the way we approach this is actually very different from publishers. So to publishers, this will be a red flag to them, right? Because a lot of them want to be able to keep the IP right. And because it's a single game collaboration, it means that, they want to have the IP right. For example, when they want to make a sequel of the game, if they want to make a game but with the same characters, they want to have the right to be able to sign the game afterwards. They want to be able to sign related to that, right? So that's actually very common to the developers. So to them, that would be the red flag. But to us, actually, we want to make sure actually a lot of developers out there in the industry, they want to be able to keep the IP rights to themselves. And therefore, our model is where they will be able to keep their IP rights. So if they develop a sequel or anything, we don't have a first right of refusal. So actually, to developers out there, this is a very important thing that they want to be able to keep. And therefore, this is something that we want to offer to them. But we believe in building a model that's based on trust, right? If they end up working with us for the first game, if they want to work with us for the second game, they might approach us. And we have cases like that too, where when they work on a second game, they come and approach us already. So to us, this wouldn't be a red flag. We want to make sure developers actually keep the IP rights to themselves, right? Because sometimes when publishers have it, they might use the IP rights in a way that the developer doesn't want to. They might develop a game where the developer is not looking into that. So I think that for us, this is not a red flag, but I believe it will be a red flag to a lot of publishers out there.
Right, understand. Okay.
I think from a VC perspective, it depends also on the stage of investments. At the early stage, there is no IP. So what we would be more concerned about is just the assignment of rights to the company for any IP that might be developed. I think if we were investing at a Series A, Series B stage where there is a live product, then that's something that we would look into a bit more. It's not a red flag in a sense that if, for example, a team has been working on an IP in collaboration with a partner, and unfortunately, maybe they work with a publisher and they don't quite own the IP outright. It's not a red flag, but I mean, obviously that there's a discount taken into account of how we value the team, right? As opposed to if they own that IP and let's say the IP is successful or seems to be gaining some traction, has a lot of potential, that's something we would value more than IP that the team doesn't own.
No, this just reminded me of the the game from CD Projekt Red, Witcher. Okay, and then recently it's after being a worldwide hit, it's recently become a Netflix TV series. I think season 2 just was broadcast. But it reminded me of that case because they actually do not own the original rights to this story. It was actually an individual Polish author who apparently, after the game was, shall we say, commissioned for the TV broadcast, he apparently brought a lawsuit against them, for the so-called something about undervaluing the assignment of the IP rights that he gave to them many years ago. So apparently he gave it away virtually for free, or maybe not free, but a very low price. You see, then apparently after that he did very well, and then suddenly I think in terms of the TV broadcast, I think he was again consulted. And then soon after that, a lawsuit appeared. He sued them for, I think, either wrongfully taking his IP or something like that. But it's interesting because I thought it meant that, okay, if they're not the original creator of the IP, it's an adaptation or it's taken from someone else, they bought it legitimately, I guess, at the end of the day. But, it raises interesting issues that, say, if you want to have further commercial exploitation of the game beyond the, console or computer, then you get converted into a TV series or even a movie. Then there are various other, issues that arise. But I think this is looking to the future. It's not necessarily applicable to all games.
No, I think it is a good point because we have titles that are based on other stories and stuff like that. Of course, this will be a red flag to us. We want to make sure they have a good relationship with the IPO holder if it's based on the stuff, right? Okay. We want to make sure they have signed all the agreements and stuff where they pass on the IP rights and they're not going to be like these lawsuits or arguments in the future. So we would take a look at this. This is actually very important. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought that was very, very, very interesting because this was a done deal more than 10 years already. Then suddenly the guy comes back and says, "Oh, actually, there's something wrong with the deal." See. But
I guess from your perspective, would the devil be in the details then? Because the book that The Witcher is based on is, I think it's a series of 6 or 7 different fantasy novels that starts from the 80s. Mm-hmm. And obviously the games themselves can start from the 80s. And I think today, a lot of the reason why The Witcher has such a following also was a lot to do with the games that CD Projekt made.
Precisely,
And then,
yeah.
And then now that it's on Netflix, we just an even broader
I think you cannot discount the contribution and the development that they have put into the original storyline to make it what it is today. Right? I think maybe that's what he saw. He saw maybe that, okay, since this is so successful, I want to have enjoy the share of the benefits. Anyway, a lesson, a cautionary tale to make sure that if you do acquire rights, it's got to be complete. And I think one of the issues here is, of course, does it cover every medium? Because if you start off with games publishing, right, then now with so many different opportunities in other media, TV and movies, that kind of thing, you got to make sure that all of those broadcasting medium is all covered. Otherwise, you end up with some of these things.
Yeah.
Precisely. Okay. So, maybe at this point it might be opportune to consider. Okay, look, you guys have got a wealth of experience. Do you have any war stories to share, like a cautionary tale or a success story, something that that can help the audience relate to some of the experiences that you've had? So maybe Felicia, I start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think specific horrible war stories here, but maybe some of the things and the lessons that we've also taken away through our processes, investing to different companies, and particularly I think at the due diligence stage as well. I think when investors particularly are investing to games companies, there is always comfort in looking at data and metrics and wanting to kind of have some comfort from that and being able to rely on it. And I think one of the things that we've noticed is, oftentimes teams will just share like a data dashboard, and it's always tempting to take the data that they present on the dashboard at face value. But again, the devil is in the details, and it's worth, I think, when metrics seem too good to be true, to dig a bit deeper.
Okay.
And understanding some of the ways that, it can be very simple things. For example, the underlying definition of how, a certain metric is derived. For example, one of the things that we would ask for very early stage companies is, for example, if they have a game out, what is the day one retention? So what's the percentage of users that are coming back to play the game at day one, day three? And it's such an easy thing to miss. A lot of teams, for example, will do things like give you the rolling retention definition, which is very generous. Basically, if I'm looking at day three rolling retention, that means that anyone who comes back between day one and day three, so maybe I come back on day two, but I never come back again on day three, I will be counted into that day three retention. And so that number looks very high and beautiful. And then when you probe a little bit more, it's like, okay, what if we use stricter definition like classic retention? They have to come back on day three in order to be counted into day three. Then that number looks very different. And so it's worth kind of probing, if retention is very high, dig a little bit more. What is that user base, the new user versus, weekly active user ratio? Does that seem to commiserate with that high retention that they're reporting? Kind of really digging into, I guess, the data discipline that each of these teams have, which we see differs from region to region just because of experience, for example. Depending on especially kind of how mature the games industry is within regions. Sometimes it's not necessarily malicious, but it's a lack of understanding of metrics. And so there have been instances where we've looked at things and data looks amazing, so strong, and you've dug a little bit more during the diligence stage and you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is painting a whole different story. And I think those kind of things are great opportunities to maybe make you pause and reevaluate, is this a team that understands things the way you want it to? When you have those discussions with them and say, like, maybe call out the fact that, your data is not quite right, how do they respond? We've had totally different reactions. We've had reactions where they're like, yeah, we know that we need to improve on this. They've taken the feedback really well. We've had teams who just dig in and say, no, you're wrong. I'm right. And maybe that's when we agree, like, okay, look, we're going to part ways here, because I think it's a relationship of trust. And if at any point you feel like, ooh, this is not a team that we can trust, we're not sure we want to be on your cap table and having our portfolio for the next 10 years, because this is the start. The start should always be the easiest part, right? Like just like in any relationship.
That's so true. It's so true. Okay, what about you, Anlu? Any interesting stories to share?
I guess Cecilia shared a cautionary tale, so maybe I can share a success story on my end.
Sure.
For us, I don't think we have encountered very difficult teams, but there's the game that we signed, like I mentioned previously, right? Sifu, we signed 2 years ago, and it has done very well. It was released last month, and it did very well both in the West and also in Asia. And as a person that was born in Hong Kong, this game definitely has a special place in my heart, because I want to see more of these like Hong Kong kung fu in game, right? So along the development process, because it's a rather culturally sensitive game among our portfolio, where it is set in China, right? So we want to make sure that we do the research well in terms of like Chinese culture topics. And the interesting I would like to share is that, 2 years later, when you get the product, you have already seen the end product. You might just sit back and enjoy. But along the development process, there's actually a lot of things that you need to take care of, you need to observe, you need to change, etc. At that point of time during development, we linked them up with a Chinese consultant that actually played through the entire game to give feedback, etc. And one of the more interesting feedback was that there's a washing machine in one of the levels, and it was front loading. So it's like you open the washing machine from the front, right? And their suggestion is that you should change to a top loading washing machine where you open from the top. And the reason behind this is that it will fit more with the environment, because it was set in like 1980s. It was set back in time. So if it's a front loading washing machine, it wouldn't be that of a good fit to the environment. So there's actually a lot of these small details along the way that we had to change, including characters' names, including what they wear, including their facial features as well. And we set in all their Chinese voiceover acting sessions to make sure that this is actually how Chinese people speak instead of like just direct translation.
Okay.
So I think this experience was actually very, very interesting, because it really shows that developers are actually doing a lot behind the scenes, where they are studying into little details like that to make sure that they are providing a very authentic experience that's very respectful to the culture. So the good thing is, of course, it did really well in China and also the West, and I think the players really appreciate our effort into making that authentic experience. So it's also why sometimes I really enjoy working in the space, right? Because as a player since young, the product I get is already finalized. I might not look into so much detail when I'm playing it, but only when you're involved in the space, you realize, there's actually a lot of effort that was put into making the game.
I see. Well, it sounds like a lot of collaboration and attention to detail when you're actually trying to make it as, authentic as possible. Right. That's interesting. Okay. Now, mindful of the time that we have, perhaps it is opportune at this time to maybe sum up what we have discussed and maybe, give some food for thought. Now, with this very limited opportunity, we have only been given a glimpse of what are the insights, the experience, and some of the relevant criteria that maybe ought to go into consideration, got to be taken into consideration when investing in any games developers. There's differences, of course, within the different players in the industry. Besides esports teams and games developers, I believe there are also what we call adjacent service providers, like your platforms and other content creators and all that. Maybe even influencers who are part of the marketing and all that. But we haven't had the time and the opportunity to actually go into depth into all of these things, right? But from what I hear from both of you, it sounds like, firstly, evaluation as to the product is one major factor. The track record, the experience of the team behind the product and what they have managed to do in the past, success or otherwise, that's also a factor. And then, of course, the dynamics between the whole team, like are they one big happy family, so to speak, working in a very conducive environment, or are there, shall we say, some elements of a dysfunctional family that you might need to be aware of? Also aware of other factors. You talk about realistic budgets, realistic timelines, and maybe caution should be cautious if there are unrealistic expectations, unrealistic ambitions for the games itself. Now, so with this in mind, maybe I will ask each of you to have a parting word on our topic today. So maybe I'll start with Felicia.
Yeah, so I think for perhaps for the audience who's interested in getting into games and investing into games, I always make a suggestion that, you know, the best way to do it is just to go out there and play games, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Play a variety of games. And, you know, I don't think you need to be a hardcore gamer to invest in games, but I would certainly say that just, you know, going out there and trying different games is the best way to help you understand the different landscape and the different options out there. You know, it's not just free to play, it's not just premium gaming, there's now also Web3 gaming. That in itself is another rabbit hole. Right. And I think whichever section you look at it, I think it always boils down to kind of the team's ability to ship and the track record. You have, for example, a lot of Web3 game opportunities right now where they have very solid experience within crypto, for example, but they've never made a game in their life and they're trying to ship, you know, an open world MMORPG. If you take away the fact that it's in a Web3 gaming and you say it's a premium game, or if you say that's a free to play game, the fact that they've never shipped a game should always be a big flag for you as to whether that's a sensible opportunity. So I think, go out, play games, they'd like to chat about games. I'm always happy to have a conversation. You know, we are a gaming focused fund, which I think is a bit of a rarity in this world. And always happy to have a conversation about that.
Indeed. Okay, thanks, Felicia. And Anlu, what about you?
Right. I think that the gaming industry is definitely very attractive. You know, even if there's COVID, we have seen number of players on Steam just increasing, it reaches new high, etc. So I think that the industry itself is definitely very attractive. But like Felicia mentioned, I think to get into the industry, you really have to understand games, like you really have to play them, because gamers are picky in a way that they pick the best games, but they are not picky in terms of, you know, they play all the different type of games out there as well. It is fun. So I think that, I agree with everything that Felicia mentioned today. And I think that, you know, it is a very interesting space. It is a very specific, because it's just specific to games, but there is actually a lot of stuff that's going on that's very interesting in the industry. And the good thing is in the industry itself, everyone should be fairly friendly, because, you know, like, for example, previously when I was interning at different places, when you talk to colleagues, you might be like, hey, what do you do for the weekend? I went to hike, I read some books, etc. But here, you know, when you talk to people, like, what games did you play recently? What games do you recommend and stuff? So I think that the environment in the gaming industry is also very friendly. And I hope that, you know, whatever I said today would be very helpful to you. If there's anything that you want to chat with me about, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Yes, thank you. So again, I express my appreciation and gratitude to both Felicia and Anlu for their time this morning to share experience and insights. And there we have it. Thank you very much for attending this panel discussion. And hope to see you all again soon. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Rizvi, Felicia, and Anlu for that delightful exchange on investments in the video and computer games industry.